forces somewhere in some country. This is a ritual that we have been seeing for decades. We've toppled governments, we've done coups d'etats, we've used intelligence services for covert purposes and done horrible things around the world. And we have put up with the most heinous human rights abusing countries. We have propped them up, we've even trained them how to commit human rights abuses. Today's demon was yesterday's friend, all in the name of either the Cold War or for commercial reasons. It's basically economic colonialism. No one uses the colonialism word, but instead of just taking over the countries, we have a better way. We just go in and have free markets. Whether we're trying to sell our products to their citizens or we're trying to mine their resources, we need to be in that country for some reason, and therefore we're going to talk about free markets, free trade. But what's really going on is we want our companies to get rich in your country.
There she is. That's what all the fuss is about, oil. It's kind of pretty, isn't it? Oil, coming up out of the ground to make life a bit more easy for all of us.
The United States is the world's largest consumer of fossil fuels. Oil is what drives the military machine of every country. That is, it provides the fuel for the aircraft, for the ships, for the tanks, for the trucks. Control of oil is indispensable. When you run out of it, your army stops. There is a direct connection between events that happened more than 50 years ago and the war in Iraq today. In 1953, the Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, became extremely irritated. The British were ripping off his country's national resources. He wanted a greater share in it. The British came to the new President Eisenhower and asked for help on this. Eisenhower very conveniently declared Mossadegh to be a communist, and we then set the CIA to overthrow him.
3 days of bloody rioting culminating in a military coup.
The result was we brought the Shah to power, and he created an extremely repressive regime that within 20 years had led to a revolution against him. The Ayatollah Khomeini creates a government that is violently anti-American.
For Americans shot up the hills.
Khomeini said, quote, I pray to God to cut the hands off all those foreign advisors.
In the after-action report by the CIA on what they had done in Iran in 1953, they said, we're going to get some blowback from this. We then made a puppet out of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, who was a friend of ours. He was an asset in the CIA's computers. We did so because he was anti-Iranian. He was very fearful that the revolution in Iran would spread into his country. He therefore went to war with Iran. The war was extremely bloody, went on throughout the 1980s. Unfortunately for Saddam Hussein, he began to lose the war. At that point, in comes the United States in the form of Donald Rumsfeld, sent to Saddam Hussein by President Reagan to tell him, we will supply you with intelligence, we will supply you with the weapons you may need through covert means. It is why cynics in Washington say, we know Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, we have the receipts. This is what we mean by blowback. He remained a friend of ours right up to his invasion in the summer of 1990 of Kuwait. We became alarmed when he invaded Kuwait that he could also go on and invade Saudi Arabia itself. The largest reserves of oil on earth. We stationed troops in Saudi Arabia. It was a mistake in every sense of the term. Remember, Osama bin Laden had said, I resent the government of Saudi Arabia for using Americans to defend Saudi Arabia against Iraq. At that point, we began to fear that we were going to lose our position in Saudi Arabia. Well, the second largest source of proven reserves on earth are in Iraq. This leads us now to demonize our previous ally and to prepare the American public for the thought that we must take him out.
I'm retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, retired from the military after 20 years. I initially started in the Air Force, and they trained me as a communication electronics officer, and I did that for about 15 years. And once I joined the Pentagon, I became a political military affairs officer for Sub-Saharan Africa and Middle East. Things were strange from the very beginning of my assignment. Within a week or so, it became clear to me that war was going to happen. This toppling was going to happen. It was just a matter of bringing the American people up to speed and getting them behind this effort. A number of people from outside of the Pentagon, political appointees, were flowing into our office, and they were working Iraq issues. These political appointees that we had came from a very small set of think tanks.
As Eisenhower said, the military-industrial complex is really three components. There's the military professionals, there is defense industry, and there is Congress. There is now a fourth component, and that is the think tanks.
You know, one of the little-known secrets of Washington is that policy isn't really generated very much within the policy apparatus. A great number of the ideas come from outside the government, from various think tanks, like the Project for the New American Century.
Saddam Hussein, here's the man, here he is in his box. I wouldn't exaggerate the influence of the Project for the New American Century. It's a very small think tank, but in some respects we argued for, I suppose you might say, elements of the Bush Doctrine before the Bush Doctrine existed or before George W. Bush became president.
The group included principals like Rumsfeld, but it also included a large number of people more or less unknown to the American public.
And these people all know each other. They had all worked together before the Bush administration.
I used to write speeches for Don Rumsfeld in the Pentagon, and we came up with this phrase that weakness is provocative, strength deters.
Our report on rebuilding America's defenses said even before September 11th, the defense budget was too low. It looked ahead to the kinds of wars that we've now ended up fighting in Afghanistan and in Iraq.
What think tanks do is come up with new rationalizations and new threats. That's what they're paid to do.
Iraq under Saddam Hussein was a terrorist state. I think Iran is a terrorist state.
North Korea is a very special problem. They can build nuclear weapons, and they're perfectly capable of exporting them, and we cannot allow that.
These are states that not only host, but in a way fund international terrorism, encourage international terrorism. They have to be eliminated.
This was almost completely adopted by the administration, in part because the people who wrote this had all been brought into the administration.
We must prevent the terrorists and regimes who seek chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons from threatening the United States.
It is not at all accidental that when the President names our enemies in the 2002 State of the Union message in the Axis of Evil, that it includes Iraq, Iran, and North Korea.
So in a real way, we have this new phenomenon where think tanks are now an integral part of what we used to think of as the military-industrial complex.
Eisenhower may well have been predicting these people when he talked about if we didn't keep an eye on the military-industrial complex, we would see what he called a disastrous rise of misplaced power. People making policy who have zero accountability to the voter. So throughout the summer, something was operating in the Pentagon that was unique. In August of 2002, it was announced to us that all of those folks that had come in and made up this expanded Iraq desk would be called the Office of Special Plans.
The Office of Special Plans was created in the Rumsfeld Department of Defense in order to produce the intelligence that the President and the Vice President wanted, making an enemy out of Iraq.
Pull the chair over here, General.
The Office of Special Plans had one primary job, and that was to produce a set of talking points on the topic of Iraq, WMD, and terrorism. And we were to use them in any document that we prepared, exactly as they were written in their entirety. We were, all of us, myself included, very familiar with what the intelligence was saying about Iraq. But the problem was, when you look at what was in these talking points, you could tell it was designed to convince the reader that Iraq, and Saddam Hussein specifically, constituted a major, serious, terrible, evil threat to not just his neighbors, but to the United States.
His regime has the design for a nuclear weapon, was working on several different methods of enriching uranium, and recently was discovered seeking significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
And that would be the statement. He's actively seeking it, and this means that he's a danger. But the intelligence actually said that Saddam Hussein in the 80s, in the late